Hello and welcome to the first episode of Sega Ages, or the 13th episode of Sega SG-Awesome. Guess it all depends on how you look at it. If you're just joining in, this show is a chronological look at all things Sega. Today we're looking at the 13th game, released for the SG-1000, Sindbad Mystery. To kind of lead into this game, I want to take you back to my early childhood. The first system that I ever played was a Commodore 64. And honestly, I was young enough that I don't really remember too much about the Commodore 64, but there are a few games that I have really fond memories of, and one of them is the chase on Tom Sawyer's Island. Now, at that time, I really didn't know the story of Tom Sawyer, and to be honest, I kind of still don't. But I always pretended that this was The Goonies, the video game. It also made that whole thing where The Goonies 2 was the only Nintendo Entertainment System game that we got make a whole lot of sense. Because, of course, the first game was released on the Commodore 64, right? Anyways, I bring this game up because the chase on Tom Sawyer's Island is a type of game that we only saw in the 1980s. And it's a game I never really see Sega making, because even in the 80s, they were making games that seemed very 1990s for the most part, and I always considered Sega a 1990s company. But Sindbad Mystery is a 1980s game, any way you look at it. It's really an evolution of the Pac-Man clones. The basic mechanic is you have to go through the maze, collect all the pieces, just like Pac-Man collects all the pellets. The thing that makes this different is that the environment is a lot more fleshed out. This happened in those clones. The games in the early 80s actually evolved really fast. Comparing it to today's games, Call of Duty from now until 4 years ago, pretty much the same game. Pac-Man clones from 1980 with Pac-Man to 4 years later, very different. This is almost like a mashup between maze games and platformers. You've got an environment that you can actually interact with, you can push boulders around, create holes. It's got a lot of mechanics for you to interact and basically escape the ghosts in Pac-Man. And in fact, Sega really didn't do much in the genre. This is the first game that I can find like this. Then they released two more. The next one was this very political commentary game, which is just an odd combination in itself, called I'm Sorry. And an interesting tidbit about that game is it appears to be the first video game featuring Michael Jackson, which I consider Michael Jackson very Sega. But we'll get to that game another day. They also made Fantasy Zone The Maze, which is mostly known for disappointing people who think that they were buying a Fantasy Zone game. And those seem to be the only Pac-Man clones that Sega made. So again, Sega did not dabble in this type of genre very much. That's what makes Sindbad Mystery pretty unique. It also was released on the Sega Saturn, which makes it a little readily available. You have to import it from Japan, unfortunately. And it was only released in the arcades other than that. Now, when I call this game an evolution of Pac-Man, I don't want that to be confused with it being innovative. It's really kind of par for the course for the video game industry at that time. That same year saw the release of Crystal Castles by Atari. That's probably the most well-known Pac-Man clone in this type of genre, where it's isomorphic, you can interact with the environment a little bit more, so on and so forth. I mean, just compare the difference between Crystal Castles and Sindbad Mystery. They look very identical, they play very similarly. So although Sega really didn't innovate, which they weren't really doing a lot of innovation at this time, what they did was they took other ideas and just made them better. And Sindbad Mystery is one of those cases. It plays really well. The SG-1000 version is not as good as the arcade. The controls are a lot tighter, but not in a good way. It's just the room that you have to move is insanely tight. That's kind of the situation. It's hard to turn sometimes. So maybe cramped is a better word. But as far as Pac-Man clones go, this is a pretty decent one. Although, if you aren't from that era and don't really have a lot of nostalgia for this genre, you can probably safely not add this to your collection. It's really a genre that you kind of had to be there. And not Pac-Man, don't get me wrong, but the kind of Pac-Man clones that came afterwards. This game plays a lot like the other SG-1000 games. It's a game that you plug in for about 5 or 10 minutes, try to beat your high score, move on to a different game. So this is a game that you sit right next to your console with your stack of games. The game's got 30 levels. You basically go around collecting the pellets from Pac-Man. Now the pellets are a little bit different because what they actually do is they uncover a piece of the treasure map seen on the right side of the screen. This tells you where the magic lamp or the treasure is going to appear. So as you're collecting the pieces, you can leave that last bit right next to the treasure. This allows you to quickly get to the treasure and avoid the skull that comes up, because once you collect all the pellets, this basically evil Otto type of character from Berserk comes by and just chases you, kills you immediately. So you really have to be next to the treasure. But you do have ways of escaping the other characters. You can dig a hole, at least that's what it appears to be happening, and that will kind of block them. Later on, the enemies will start uncovering the holes, and you can also push boulders and squash the enemies this way. Now the enemies come back and respawn, so you can't just kill them all and have free reign of the map, but it will get you out of those tight spots. And much like Chase on Tom Sawyer's Island, it has these places where you can basically go in one part of the maze, come out another part. This is similar to Pac-Man, where you can leave on the left side, come out the right side, but just taken to the next level. And all of this is done on a repeating 30 board system. So you've got 30 levels that repeat over once you complete them, with the enemies just getting faster, tougher,